Hello, all you cool kittens and kittens. I hope you guys are doing well today. We are here after spring break, and it is Tuesday, April 14th. We're going to talk about the stomach today, a little bit on the esophagus, and about digestion and what those chemical processes that are happening in the stomach. All right. We won't fill this entire page out, but we're going to start on it. It's on page 11 in your study guide packet. So this should be kind of a little bit of review for you. When we filled out that first page of your notes, we talked about all of the different processes that your digestive system does, from ingestion to digestion, propulsion, absorption, and then finally elimination. This page right here is just simply focusing on digestion. Now, when we talk about digestion, there are two different types. You've got chemical and mechanical. Digestion means to break things down. So you can mechanically break things down into smaller pieces. So in your mouth, you mechanically break things down. What does your mouth do to break things down smaller? These nice, beautiful chompers, right? Your teeth are going to chew. Our fancy word for chewing is mastication. Other mechanical things in our stomach, your stomach churns, which is this action of sort of it like rolls a little bit, this mixing action that your stomach does. And then when you get into the small intestine, and I believe earlier on this lecture, I had a picture of what segmentation looks like. It was kind of this like squeezing action where you might take a chunk of food and split it in half, and then it mixes it with two other sections in the small intestine. So all of those are processes of breaking things down, but mechanically, not chemically. So we're going to start talking about chemical digestion today. So first of all, you do have chemical digestion in your mouth. In fact, I grabbed a little Jolly Rancher here. I won't be able to talk very well if I eat it, but okay, say I pop this in my mouth for the duration of this video without chewing, without doing any mechanical digestion, it would eventually disappear. It's that idea of how many licks can you get to the center of a lollipop situation. You can totally digest sugar in your mouth, okay? The other area where digestion occurs is in your stomach. Your stomach is kind of a holding container, but it does begin the processes of chemical digestion there. And then your duodenum, which is a section of your small intestine. We are not going to get into all of this here today. I didn't spell that right. So it goes in that order specifically, okay? When we talk about chemical digestion, first step of digestion is in the mouth because of your salivary amylase. That's the chemical that your saliva glands produce. If I keep thinking about this Jolly Rancher, I'm thinking about a delicious food or delicious meal, I might have some salivary amylase being produced in my mouth just from the sheer thought of it because my body is preparing for hopefully food. They digest starches. So if you remember that starches are sugars, they're complex sugars, basically like long chains of sugars hooked up together. So it's going to digest any of those starchy sugars in your mouth. That's what salivary amylase does. Your stomach, second step of digestion, it produces a very important chemical, among others, but most importantly, pepsin. You can think P for protein, pepsin and protein. Pepsin is what breaks down proteins throughout your digestive system. Now, as we'll see here in a minute, your stomach doesn't actually produce pepsin directly. What it does produce is pepsinogen. And then it becomes activated and turns into pepsin. So really what the stomach truly produces is pepsinogen, and then it activates it in the stomach and it turns into pepsin, which digests protein. Now, adults, that's all they make. But children, especially infants who are drinking a lot of milk, they produce another protein digesting enzyme called renin. And it's different from renin. It has two N's there. But this digests milk protein. So this is only in infants, little bitty children that are going to produce this. Why? Because they're drinking way more milk because of breastfeeding than regular adults do. So they have this extra kind of protein that helps break that down in them. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about sort of this act and process. This is just that picture to remind you of all these different steps. Digestion, remember here, we've got all these arrows coming in here, but honestly, we could include some little like red droplets here in the mouth because digestion starts in the mouth. You could also have some of these little droplets showing up in the stomach as well because protein digestion begins in the stomach. So this is all the chemical, at least in this case, breakdown. The mechanical breakdown there's in purple, right? This churning and your chewing action, as well as segmentation in the stomach. Okay, all of those are types of digestion. This isn't super essential for the test, but I just want to briefly talk about swallowing. This is a picture from your textbook. You don't need to jot any of this down, but there's this action. I wanted you to see sort of what this looks like. When we talk about chewing in our mouth and the tongue manipulates food in our mouth, we form this bolus of food. And then as you swallow, your tongue is going to push up. Okay, so if you can even swallow just as I'm talking about this, the tongue pushes up to the roof of the mouth, which then forces that bolus of food to the back, to the oropharynx. And then as it continues down, sort of the back of the throat, your tongue should be kind of reached to the top of the mouth. And the soft palate and uvula rise. And then your if you notice the epiglottis, this is the point in which the epiglottis needs to make sure and cover up that trachea so you don't choke on that food. So this is what it looks like open, and then this is what it looks like closed, okay, as that food is moving through. And then once you get into the pharynx and esophageal steps here, this is where that rhythmic squeezing is going to take over, our peristalsis that occurs. So that's going to travel down. Your esophagus is about 10 centimeters, so roughly about a foot long. Basically, you can think from like the base of your jaw, right above your diaphragm, so kind of at the bottom of your rib cage. That's how long your diaphragm would be, your esophagus would be. And so you've got this like squeezed and relaxed muscles, and then a squeezed and relaxed muscles, and a squeezed and relaxed muscles as the bolus of food moves down. Now the stomach, okay, has this sort of interesting shape here. We'll talk a little bit about it, but there is a sphincter right here. And to be defined as a sphincter, there are extra muscles in place that close off sections. The one that's sort of unique here is gastroesophageal sphincter. It is not as strong as some of the other ones. So if you think of like your anal sphincter, for example, that one has a lot more conscious control, obviously, as well as it's a more forceful sphincter. This one, a little less so. But it is a sphincter that stays closed till that bolus of food gets there. It's going to open up and then the food gets deposited in the stomach. Now, if you've ever experienced heartburn before or gastrointestinal reflux disease, it's abbreviated, it's called GERD, gastrointestinal reflux disease. GERD is essentially congenital heartburn. And a few things can cause it. Pregnancy, for one, if a woman's pregnant, pushes up on her diaphragm and her stomach, and the shape of her organs change, and that sphincter can't stay closed. So a lot of pregnant women suffer from heartburn. You can also suffer from heartburn because of obesity or other causes. You might have like a hernia or something, some issue there with the sphincter. But what happens is the acid from the stomach and food creep up into the esophagus. When it gets right in this region of the esophagus, it's very painful and it burns, and it's right behind, it's not where the heart is, but right behind the heart. And the painful effects of it hurt so bad, it is described as feeling like a heart attack. It can be that painful. So some people get rushed to the emergency room and it ends up just being acid reflux. Thankfully, that's a nicer thing than a heart attack. This is also not a picture in your textbook, but I just wanted to show you some of the unique structures of the stomach. So you don't need to know all these labels for the test, but the fundus is this shape here at the top of the stomach where it sort of comes up. You got a greater and lesser curvature. It's just referring to kind of this sloping shape of the stomach. And then, it connects with the beginning of your intestines, the duodenum. That's the correct spelling if you wanted to go back and fix my misspelling from earlier. And I want you to note these 3 different layers of muscles. Notice that they are all running different directions. The fibers in here running different directions. This allows for a very unique churning effect that your stomach is able to do and mix food. The other very interesting thing about the stomach is when you look at the inside of a stomach, it has these really interesting ridges. They're called rugae. When your stomach is contracted, those rugae will be a lot bigger. It's like taking a shirt and crumpling it up, right? I'm going to have more folds in it because I'm making it smaller. But then if I stretch it out, right, there's going to be less folds in it. And so when your stomach is full, those rugae sort of might smooth out a little bit. So your stomach is able somewhat to expand and contract slightly as the food is stored in here. Now, what I really want to talk about today is the specific structures inside the stomach that produce stomach excretion. So this is on page 4, okay? So we're looking at the stomach here. The main thing that I do want you to know about the stomach are the 2 sphincters. So the one up here at the top, okay, I know the other page said esophageal, but also sometimes it's called the cardioesophageal sphincter because it's the sphincter that runs behind your heart that can cause heartburn. So it's given 2 different names there. And then the other sphincter, it's a lot more forceful sphincter because it really needs to stay really tightly closed until the food is ready to move into the small intestine. That's the kind of more forceful sphincter of the 2. It's called the pyloric sphincter. And that's the junction between the stomach and the small intestine. All right. So if we just take a little section of the inside of the stomach where those rugae are, I want to talk about these glands. They're called the gastric glands and gastric pits that secrete the digestive enzymes of the stomach, which is our main focus of today. So these are the glands themselves, okay, down here, and we have specialized cells that are going to secrete certain substance. And the pit is just the hole that's connected to the gland. Okay, kind of like how a sweat pore is connected to a sweat gland. Same idea here. So these are the gastric pits from the top, gastric pits from the side. There's different cell types in here. Okay, all along here in the gastric pits, these are mucus cells that produce, as you can guess, mucus. Right here where it connects the pit to the gland, we call those the mucus neck cells. They also are producing mucus. And then we've got parietal cells and chief cells. I don't have this one labeled. It's not labeled in your textbook. They might be enteroendocrine glands, or cells, but it's not necessary for you guys to label that one. So on that same picture, we're going to zoom in a little bit more, okay, on this gastric gland and talk about what these cells are actually secreting. All right, so we've got, in this cell in particular, this blue one pictured right here, which is a parietal cell, we've got little mitochondria in here, and you can see that the cell itself almost has its own little gland where it's going to be putting its secretions out there. We also have our chief cells. and the enteroendocrine cells. I'm not sure what the other label on there was meant to be. It might be one of those two. Not important though. So each of these different cells produce different substances. Okay. So the purple ones, the chief cells, and the parietal cells are secreting different substances. So my chief cells here are secreting pepsinogen. Okay. And if you remember from our previous, pepsinogen is inactive pepsin. Now the parietal cells are secreting hydrochloric acid. Now, when the parietal cells, so these are the acid producers, and that's super important. We know that your stomach has stomach acid in it, but why? Okay, we say it breaks down food, but it actually has a more important role. Its job is to activate pepsinogen. So if you remember, I said it was inactive, okay, hydrochloric acid, a strong acid, activates it and turns it into pepsin. And so when pepsin is created, then proteins can be broken down. So if you ate a big steak, okay, or a handful of nuts or whatever, okay, you've got some protein in your system. Your chief cells and your parietal cells are going to work together to produce the grand product at the end. There is pepsin that's going to be breaking down proteins in your stomach. Okay. There are other I already mentioned the mucus cells, okay, they're producing mucus. And then these enteroendocrine glands, okay. So if you remember, endocrine glands, these are ones that secrete substances into your bloodstream. So hormones really is what we're normally thinking of. But in this case, they're not going into the bloodstream, they're going into like an organ itself. So that's why they're called enteroendocrine glands. And there's a wide variety of things that they secrete. Now, if maybe you get comforted here while we're all on at home and on quarantine by eating, I find myself snacking a whole bunch during the day. You are kind of trying to soothe yourself with food. And there's a great reason why, is because these glands right here actually end up producing other hormones and other chemicals like serotonin. If you've heard of serotonin before, it is what they call a mood stabilizer drug, at least in your brain. It's the one that sort of keeps people from having anxiety or depression. It sort of keeps you at an even keel. It's not like the super elated, happy drug, but it's more of just keeping you at a nice, stable, normal. This is why food comforts a lot of people. And when people are mourning and sad, right, a lot of times people give them food and things like that. Is because you have serotonin in other places in your body, but your stomach secretes serotonin and it makes you feel better. Serotonin has other effects too, not just to be happy, right? Because of food, serotonin is going to encourage more like blood flow in an area. It can actually stimulate diarrhea if you have an illness like food poisoning or something like that. So it's not just meant to be happy, but that's that brain-gut connection some people refer to. You have serotonin that's made in your stomach, which is cool. Those endocrine glands also produce histamine as well, and some other substances, somatostatin, and they are just other hormones that stimulate and target your digestive system. And we'll talk more in detail about those hormones. Okay, but the main thing I want you to take away here is your chief cells and parietal cells work together to produce pepsin, digest protein. That's the main thing. That's all for today. Hopefully short and sweet. I hope you guys have a great day.